Well, here we are, back again. I'm going to do two, I think, this time. And the first one is a follow-up, and specifically on the Richard question related to keying paintings. So he asked me to read this quote, and I'm going to read it to you so that you've got it. This will be a big nuisance for my producer, but I want to read it to you so you have it. And it goes like this. And again, this is from Gamble, and it's from the book Dennis Miller Bunker that was written by Gamble. And that, again, has all sorts of good information, and particularly stuff, as usual, related to the impressionist mindset. But this is what he said. But the plein air painter observed that out of doors, even the darkest tones were luminous and saturated with color. They also observed that the actual value of these dark tones was very much lighter than it had been the convention to paint them. So the actual value of these dark tones was very much lighter than had been the convention to paint them. They therefore proceeded to key their pictures by painting their darkest tones in their actual values as closely as they could be matched on the palette, and taking great care to give them the full degree of coloration that they carry in nature. But while this procedure raised the general key of their pictures considerably, it also shortened the range within which they could obtain their contrasts. For the brighter colors observable out of doors, especially in sunlight, far exceed the brilliance of any pigment seen under indoor lighting conditions. They perceived, nevertheless, that by giving to the sky the maximum lightness compatible with suggesting its color, and then keeping all the intermediate tones in their proper relation between the sky tone and the pre-established darkest values, they did succeed in suggesting much of the quality of outdoor light and atmosphere. Now, Richard, that's not specifically his question. I'm going to give you his question, but I'm going to talk about that several points in there first. Number one, when I was working with Gamble, when we were painting landscape, it absolutely was the case that Gamble would tell you to do that. He would say, try to match your darkest notes as literally as you can, and make the sky as light as you can and still have chroma in it, and go. And so that would be your darkest dark and lightest light. Now, the only thing that I do differently since that time is I don't live there in that world of matching colors in a sight-sizey way. I mean, first of all, he implies in what he says that it really can't be done. And so the real question is, why would you do that? But the second question is, there is this thing called general tonality that dominates you. So if you're standing outdoors and you can see the range, the general tonality of the painting, and much like that Sargent one I've shown you a number of times, you can see the basic ground is really light, but the figure in the foreground is so contrasty that you could almost do anything in there, providing you keep the intensity of the color, because otherwise it won't feel like daylight. We talked just earlier about the Henchy approach, and I was going to say, how in the world do you justify that if you can't do chroma? Those guys really did understand the idea of bringing all the chroma in all the locations. But so to follow up, you wind up working in this more shallow range. No matter what you do, you wind up typically working in a fairly shallow range. And what you have got to do is really be good with chroma, really be good with the intensity of the color, and and everything is everything being relative. Then watch the general tonality and see when you get all those things happening together. Here's my darkest light. There's my and it's saturated, and there's my lightest light, and it's saturated. All right, I'm going to try to live here, and then just start putting all the colors in a relationship that sits between those 2 points, and you should be in perfectly good shape. Now, why wouldn't that work? Okay, so the question from Richard is, why wouldn't that work indoors? Okay, I feel there's always more to learn. So Gamble makes his point about key and landscape painting, and I was interested to learn what you make of the question regarding a studio painting with a similar range. Now, I don't think there is one, actually, unless you're looking through a window. And I've done that. I've done a portrait with the person, and I had to look through a window. There's a window in the background. So that's where you really experience that, where I was talking about in an earlier video about looking out this window, all the values out there. There's not a single a dark out there that's as what shall we say, as light as the lights in here. By the way, I'm thinking that I'm actually out of light, so I'm going to put this light on. Speaking of the light, so I guess it's not plugged in. All right, Paul, that isn't going to work then. So I hope this works out, given the light I've got. So that's that fits in, doesn't it? But no, if you just keep in mind two things, Richard, the key thing is this. You've got to find out what it takes to get the effects, and you've got to make sure that they live within the general tonality that you can plainly see. Is this a dark picture? Is it a middle tone picture? Is it a middle tone light picture? Or is it a light picture? And I'm talking about the combination of all those things taken together. What would you say about this picture? Because that's also one of your obligations. You're trying to live within that world. So, you don't get to do inky darks anymore, as Gamel's pointing out. But if there were such a range indoors, you'd do it exactly the same way. You'd say, let X be my lightest light. And of course, the chroma indoors is not going to be anywhere near the nuisance, so to speak. And yet many times people will be sloppy about that and really not bring all the life in the color. And therefore, you'll start doing other things like exaggerating your differences in the lights and darks. So so my answer to that question, and that's why I'm giving you two of them today, is a simple no. I've never found that it requires anything different at all when you go indoors versus outdoors. And if you saw the same chromatic stuff indoors by comparison with outdoors at the same, so the same range of chromas at the same range of values, I'd be very, very, very surprised. But nevertheless, it doesn't mean anything. It means that no matter what world you come into, it's just a search. Your first obligation as you begin to set down notes is find out what range you can work in to produce the maximum of the light and the color quality and the valuistic unity, right? The valuistic range. And you will be fine. You will be fine. You'll find a range that'll work for you. And of course, I shouldn't just simply say that. It also depends on your capacity to work with effects and to create actual effects where, like making the edges right where joints meet. But, okay, so enough on that one. I did want to bring, not quite enough on that one. I did bring this painting in. I'm going to make an attempt to show it to you. My light is not good today in this studio, but I thought you might be amused. This is a friend of Tarbell's who painted this one. And it looks like that's something. Maybe that'll work for you. But this picture is painted in a very light. I'm just going to move it a little bit back and forth through here. You might be able to get an idea. Yeah, if I tilt it back, there we go. You might be able to get an idea sort of what range this lives in. But this is a very shallow range picture. This is one of those dismal days in New England, where you might say milky days. And so the lights in the top are, they've been treated as if they had negligible value. I mean, they're fairly neutral, both in chroma and in value. But the overall picture you can see is basically done in a really shallow value range. But it's not the most effective picture I've ever seen, and I think I'd suggest that it may be significantly because the intensities may or may not be off. But nevertheless, I thought it was a nice example of something that lives in a very shallow value range. All right. All right. Now, a last question, and then this is you can see why I would try to do two today. But this is, another Gabriel question. I really enjoy the pictures you posted this week. Blah, blah. All right. So I'm going to apply that to my next study from life. Okay. He's talking about my studio process and the way I begin with color spots. So what's with the self-portrait behind you in this video? Do you think it's a good way of learning how to paint? Did Gamel make self-portraits? Well, I'll show you that thing. Gamel, I never saw a self-portrait by Gamel. I don't know that he ever did one. And I don't know that I have any reason, in my own mind that he would have had for not doing one. Although the necessity sort of doesn't exist if you have all the kinds of money in the world to hire models. So one does self-portraits for that reason, in part, frequently. And one does, I would say, I mean, I remember being that guy who you sit down and you simply say, I can't afford a model today, but I need to paint from life. I need to do some work from life. And you are it. You are the life, and it's more difficult to do with a full figure, but with your head, every time you look toward whatever the camera, the mirror you set up, you can stabilize your pose and look for a few minutes, do your memory work, get your concepts, and go back to work on the 5th floor, as Degas said, right? Anyway, I'm just going to, for the fun of it, just going to show you a little bit closer up version of this one. I don't remember why I did this, actually. I think I was just amusing myself with some a general love of red chalk that I learned by copying Raphael. And so I'm guessing that might show okay. And maybe about that light. Yeah, I know that others in the past, shouldn't have any glare on it, so I could turn it more toward the light. But that gives you some idea of what I was doing. But that's, of course, a mirror image, so my hair part and stuff might be slightly different. But yeah, that's just me drawing from the visual order, and nothing else more to it than that. I had been working on an imaginative picture that had me in it as, and this might have been with a thought, toward thinking about that. But no, but this also gives you a sense of what I value in the drawing process. But anyway, I do recommend you use the red chalk. This chalk came out of a cave in I want to say in Italy. Gamble gave me a slice of it when I was a student there. He had a disc, the equivalent of a hockey puck. And he allowed me to slice off with a hacksaw, slice off a nice little piece, and I've had it ever since. It's as hard as anything. It lasts forever. It has a really beautiful color. Anyway, no, that's the end of it for today. Thank you both for those questions. I look forward to the next time with you all. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and all the rest. And thank you very much.